The Second World War was the bloodiest conflict in human history. It split the world's nations into two opposing military alliances. The Allies, led by Britain and its empire, the United States, the Soviet Union, and France, united against the Axis powers of Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. After the First World War and the economic crises of the 1920s, aggressive nationalism began to emerge in Europe. Keen to reverse the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, and reassert its dominance of Europe, Germany annexed Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia in 1938. Economic turmoil had also brought about militaristic movements in the Japanese Empire. Seeking influence and resources, Japan launched an invasion of China in 1937. World War II, also called Second World War, was a conflict that involved virtually every part of the world during the years 1939 to 45. The principal belligerents were the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the Allies, France, Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and, to a lesser extent, China. It was the biggest conflict in history that had lasted almost 6 years. Nearly some 100 million people had been militarized, and 50 million had been killed, around 3% of the world's population. Causes of war. The major causes of World War II were numerous. They include the impact of the Treaty of Versailles following World War I, the worldwide economic depression, failure of appeasement, the rise of militarism in Germany and Japan, and the failure of the League of Nations. Treaty of Versailles. Following World War I, the victorious Allied powers met to decide Germany's future. Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Under this treaty, Germany had to accept guilt for the war and to pay reparations. Germany lost territory and was prohibited from having a large military. The humiliation faced by Germany under this treaty paved the way for the spread of ultranationalism in Germany. Failure of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was an international organization set up in 1919 to keep world peace. It was intended that all countries would be members, and that if there were disputes between countries, they could be settled by negotiation rather than by force. The League of Nations was a good idea, but ultimately a failure, as not all countries joined the League. Also, the League had no army to prevent military aggression such as Italy's invasion of Ethiopia in Africa or Japan's invasion of Manchuria in China. Great Depression of 1929. The worldwide economic depression of the 1930s took its toll in different ways in Europe and Asia. In Europe, political power shifted to totalitarian and imperialist governments in several countries, including Germany, Italy, and Spain. In Asia, a resource-starved Japan began to expand aggressively, invading China and maneuvering to control a sphere of influence in the Pacific. Rise of fascism. Victor's stated aims in World War I had been to make the world safe for democracy, and post-war Germany was made to adopt a democratic constitution, as did most of the other states restored or created after the war. In the 1920s, however, the wave of nationalistic, militaristic totalitarianism known by its Italian name, fascism. It promised to minister to people's wants more effectively than democracy and presented itself as the one sure defense against communism. Benito Mussolini established the first fascist, European dictatorship during the interwar period in Italy in 1922. Rise of Nazism. Adolf Hitler, the leader of the German National Socialist Nazi Party, preached a racist brand of fascism. Hitler promised to overturn the Versailles Treaty, restore German wealth and glory, and secure additional living space for the German people, who he contended deserved more as members of a superior race. In 1933, Hitler became the German Chancellor, and in a series of subsequent moves established himself as dictator. Moreover, in 1941 the Nazi regime unleashed a war of extermination against Slavs, Jews, and other elements deemed inferior by Hitler's ideology. Policy of appeasement. Hitler openly denounced the Treaty of Versailles and began secretly building up Germany's army and weapons. Although Britain and France knew of Hitler's actions, they thought a stronger Germany would stop the spread of communism from Russia. An example of appeasement was the Munich Agreement of September 1938. In the agreement, Britain and France allowed Germany to annex areas in Czechoslovakia where German speakers lived. Germany agreed not to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia or any other country. However, in March 1939, Germany broke its promise and invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. Even then, neither Britain nor France was prepared to take military action. Key turning points of the World War II. The start. 3 years of mounting international tension. encompassing the Spanish Civil War, the union of Germany and Austria. Hitler's occupation of the Sudetenland and the invasion of Czechoslovakia led to deterioration of ties between Axis power and Allied powers. However, the German invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, and subsequently 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. This marked the beginning of World War II. Phony War. The Western Europe was very quiet during the first few months of the war. This period of war is known as Phony War. Preparations for war continued in earnest, but there were few signs of conflict, and civilians of the Western European countries, Allied powers, evacuated to safe places. Ribbentrop Pact. By the early part of 1939, the German dictator Adolf Hitler had become determined to invade and occupy Poland. Poland, for its part, had guarantees of French and British military support should it be attacked by Germany. Hitler intended to invade Poland anyway, but first he had to neutralize the possibility that the Soviet Union would resist the invasion of its western neighbor. Secret negotiations in August 1939 led to the signing of the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact in Moscow. Further, Russia followed Germany into Poland in September, and Poland was carved up between the two invaders before the end of the year. Winter War 1940. The Winter War between Russia and Finland concluded in March, and in the following month Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. Denmark surrendered immediately, but the Norwegians fought on, with British and French assistance, surrendering in June 1940. Fall of France 1940. After war with Scandinavian countries got over, Germany invaded France, Belgium, and Holland. During this phase, the Western Europe encountered the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Blitzkrieg, Germany's combination of fast armored tanks on land and superiority in the air, made a unified attacking force that was both innovative and effective. Despite greater numbers of air and army personnel in Allied powers, they proved no match for German forces. In France, an armistice was signed with Germany, with the puppet French Vichy government. Having conquered France, Hitler turned his attention to Britain and began preparations for an invasion. Battle of Britain 1940. Lasting from July to September 1940, it was the first war to be fought solely in the air. Germany took decisions to attack from airfields and factories to the major cities, but somehow the Royal Air Force managed to squeak a narrow victory. This ensured the ultimately indefinite postponement of the German invasion plans. War getting global. With continental Europe under Nazi control and Britain safe for the time being, the war took on a more global dimension in 1941. Following the defeat of Mussolini's armies in Greece and Tobruk, German forces arrived in North Africa and invaded Greece and Yugoslavia in April 1941. Operation Barbarossa. After facing defeat in Britain, Hitler broke the Ribbentrop Pact and invaded Russia in 1941. The initial advance was swift, with the fall of Sebastopol at the end of October and Moscow coming under attack at the end of the year. The bitter Russian winter, however, like the one that Napoleon had experienced a century and a half earlier, crippled the Germans. The Soviets counterattacked in December, and the Eastern Front stagnated until the spring. Pearl Harbor. The Japanese, tired of American trade embargoes, mounted a surprise attack on the U.S. Navy base of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 7, 1941. This ensured that global conflict commenced, with Germany declaring war on the U.S. a few days later. Also, within a week of Pearl Harbor, Japan had invaded the Philippines, Burma, and Hong Kong. American entry into the war. Through the Battle of Midway in 1942, the U.S. entered World War II. In this battle, U.S. sea-based aircraft destroyed 4 Japanese carriers and a cruiser, marking the turning point in World War II. Also, the news of mass murders of Jewish people by the Nazis reached the Allies, and the U.S. pledged to avenge these crimes. Reversal of German fortunes. By the second half of 1942, British forces gained the initiative in North Africa and Russian forces counterattacked at Stalingrad. In February 1943, Germany surrendered at Stalingrad to Soviet Union. This was the first major defeat of Hitler's armies. Further, German and Italian forces in North Africa surrendered to the Allies. As the Russian advance on the Eastern Front gathered pace, recapturing Kharkiv and Kiev from Germany. Moreover, Allied bombers began to attack German cities in enormous daylight air raids. The Russians reached Berlin, capital of Germany, on April 21, 1945. Hitler killed himself on the 30th, 2 days after Mussolini had been captured and hanged by Italian partisans. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 7, and the following day was celebrated as Victory in Europe Day. The war in Europe was over. Nuclear bombing in the end. Plans were being prepared for an Allied invasion of Japan, but fears of fierce resistance and massive casualties prompted Harry Truman, the new American president, to sanction the use of an atomic bomb against Japan. Such bombs had been in development since 1942, and on August 6, 1945, one of them was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, another was dropped on Nagasaki. No country could have withstood such attacks, and the Japanese surrendered on August 14th. With the surrender of Japan, World War II was finally over. Aftermath of World War II. New superpowers. World War II brought about changes in the status of countries and continents. Britain and France lost their positions of preeminence as superpowers and yielded place to the USA and the USSR. Start of decolonization. After the war, Britain and France were confronted with various domestic and external problems. Both of them could no longer hold onto their respective colonies. Thus, the post-war world witnessed the end of colonialism in Africa and Asia. Birth of UN. One of the momentous results of the war was the birth of the United Nations Organization. Although the League failed to deliver, mankind did not altogether lose its hopes of making the world a safer and happier place to live in. The UN Charter enshrines the hopes and ideals of mankind on the basis of which countries can work together to maintain lasting peace. However, the establishment of the UN was agreed much before the end of World War II under the Atlantic Charter. Start of Cold War. After the end of the war, a conference was held in Potsdam, Germany, to set up peace treaties. The countries that fought with Hitler lost territory and had to pay reparations to the Allies. Germany and its capital Berlin were divided into 4 parts. The zones were to be controlled by Great Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union. The 3 Western Allies and the Soviet Union disagreed on many things, and as time went on, Germany was divided into 2 separate countries: East Germany, which had a communist government, and West Germany, which was a democratic state. This laid the foundation of the Cold War. New Economic World Order. Bretton Woods Conference, formerly United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, meeting at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, July 1 to 22, 1944. During World War II, to make financial arrangements for the post-war world after the expected defeat of Germany and Japan. It drew up a project for the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development (IBRD), now known as World Bank, to make long-term capital available to states urgently needing such foreign aid, and a project for the International Monetary Fund (IMF) to finance short-term imbalances in international payments in order to stabilize exchange rates. Also, the US dollar was established as a reserve currency for the world trade. India and World War II. World War II had taken an immense toll on the British Empire. Britain had lost a lot of capital, and they were looking to their colonies to help them get the status of world power back. However, Mahatma Gandhi at this time organized Indians against the British. Also, World War II broke out to contain Hitler's intention of having German colonies beyond its borders, the same colonial occupation that Britain had already been practicing for centuries. Thus, after the war, people all over the world started supporting voices against British occupation over its colonies. When the Labour Party came to power in 1945 in Britain, it inclined towards internationalism and racial equality, among other liberal principles. Soon after coming into power, Prime Minister Clement Attlee, Labour Party, began the process of granting India its independence in 1947. Key takeaways. World War II was a battle between 2 groups of countries, the Allies and the Axis. The major Allied powers were Britain, France, Russia, China, and the United States. The major Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan. Before World War II began, Germany was ruled by a man named Adolf Hitler. Together with the Nazi Party, he wanted Germany to rule Europe. To gain more land and power, on September 1, 1939, German troops invaded Poland. After Hitler refused to stop the invasion, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. During the course of the war, German forces advanced through Europe. By the summer of 1941, they had invaded France, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, Denmark, Norway, Greece, Yugoslavia, and the USSR. Millions of Germans were imprisoned and killed because they didn't fit the image of the perfect German. Hitler wanted to create what he thought was the best and strongest race, and to the Nazi Party, This excluded certain groups, such as Jews, Gypsies, and those with physical and mental disabilities. In an attempt to eliminate a racial enemy outside of Germany, such groups were also persecuted in the countries invaded by German forces. The group most heavily targeted by the Nazis were the Jews. Around 6 million Jewish people were killed during World War II in one of history's most terrible events, the Holocaust. Racist in his views, Hitler blamed Jewish people for Germany losing World War I and claimed they were dangerous to German people and society. Around the same time that Germany fought for power in Europe, Japan wanted to control Asia and the Pacific. In 1937, before World War II had officially begun, under Emperor Hirohito, Japan attacked China, bringing the two nations into years of conflict. The US didn't join the war until 1941, when Japan attacked the United States at their naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. On December 8, 1941, the very next day, the US declared war on Japan and, in turn, its German allies. Some countries remained neutral in World War II. Such countries were Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland, who chose not to join either side. The Germans surrendered on May 8, 1945. In 1944, an Allied army crossed from Britain to free France from Nazi rule. 1 year later, Allied armies invaded Germany, forcing the Germans to surrender. After nuclear attacks on Japan's major cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan also surrendered to Allied forces in August the same year. World War II had ended. Around 64 million people died in World War II. That's more than the entire population of the United Kingdom.